displayed within. And that brings about our word of the day, satire. Satire is literature made to ridicule a person or group of people.
The Augustan Movement took place during the first half of the 18th century. It was a very positive time as poetry and trade were hitting their peaks. Novels were introduced as well as capitalism. The first libraries opened and an abundance of knowledge was quickly available to everyone, especially women. The time also saw the introduction of satire. Satire is a form of literature meant to ridicule an individual or concept. We see this today with things such as political cartoons. Often it was all in good fun and led to improvement. Prose is the term for the new form of language at the time. Writers started using natural flow of speech instead of a rhythmic structure in their work. This allowed readers to better enjoy what they were reading. Class conflict led to the downfall of British royalty. Well, not necessarily the downfall, but they did lose a lot of the power as a result. It often came in the form of street fights and riots. Queen Anne and King George II were both victims of this class conflict. As you can see on this next slide, Queen Anne accomplished very little during her time of power. In 1708, Queen Anne vetoes a bill, the last time a bill would ever be vetoed by the sovereign. And onto the timeline for King George, we see that he has even less influence. All he seemed to be good for here was leading troops into battle. Very little influence, almost hard to believe that this is the timeline for a British royal. As you can see, very little was thought of British royalty. Anne was depicted as a weak, irresolute woman beset by bedchamber quarrels and deciding high policy on the basis of personalities. George, too, was presented with a negative attitude. George is depicted as a weak buffoon governed by his wife and ministers. Some other notable individuals of this time period are Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope, both popular in the field of satire. Pope was a common poet known for his translations of Shakespeare and Homer, while Swift spent lots of time using his imagination in writing novels. Some of his most famous works of art are Gulliver's Travels and A Tale of a Tub. Both of these men very well contributed to the class conflict. They brought up new ideas and challenged those with a higher social status.
Welcome to the Old English News Station, where we always present you with the latest gossip. Today on the Old English News Station, death. Jonathan Swift dead just 1 year after Alexander Pope. Will the end of one of the most satiristic men bring about the end of the Augustan movement? They say his eye had inflamed to the size of an egg. By golly! Hear for yourself the gruesome details of Swift's death soon. In other news, public libraries are increasing in popularity all throughout London. What do you think about this? Weigh in on our blog and stick around to hear from one of our experts on why literacy is becoming so popular among women. Only on the Old English News Station. Libraries grew increasingly popular over the course of the 18th century, especially for illiterate women wanting to learn to read and write. The time during the 18th century was also known as the Golden Age for libraries. It was called this because some of the most well-known and important libraries were founded during this time period. For now, though, we will take a look inside one of the first popular novels, Gulliver's Travels. Lame Whale Gulliver is just the run-of-the-mill Englishman who is trained to become a surgeon. He has also learned mathematics and navigation with the hope of traveling. After a while, Gulliver's business starts to fail, and that is when our adventure begins. On Gulliver's first voyage, there is a huge storm, and he ends up finding himself in a land of tiny people, called the Lilliputians. It all starts out when he awakes on some grass with his entire body tied down by thousands of tiny threads. The Lilliputians then transport Gulliver back to their city, where they hold him hostage. There he entertains the emperor and becomes a useful resource in war against the Belfusu, the Lilliputians' rival. The whole rivalry was started because the Belfusu cracked their eggs differently than the Lilliputians. Soon he gets convicted of treason for putting out a fire in the royal palace by urinating on the flames, and condemned to be blinded and starved to death. But he escapes to Belfusu, repairs a boat, and goes back to England. The Lilliputians represent all of humankind and misplaced pride. After 2 months in England, Gulliver becomes restless and eager to get back on the ocean. Not soon after launching his ship, he gets caught in a monsoon and finds himself in a land of giants called Brobdingnag. He is found by a farmer and is treated as little more than an animal for amusement. The farmer uses Gulliver as an entertainment piece and makes a fortune charging other giants to see him perform. The farmer then sells Gulliver to the queen, and while there he finds himself becoming very disgusted by the giants, because since they are so big, their flaws can be seen much easier. As quoted from the book, their enormous skin pores, and the sound of their torrential urination. The Brobdingnagians are also very ignorant, and the king doesn't know anything about politics. Gulliver ends up leaving when an eagle comes by and grabs his cage, and drops him into the sea, where he is rescued. The second part represents human privacy, personal life, and it reminds us of all the disgusting things humans do. On Gulliver's third adventure, his ship is attacked by pirates, and he ends up on a strange island that is controlled by a flying island called Laputa. When he arrives on Laputa, people surround him almost immediately, and Gulliver notices that they look very strange. Each person has their head tilted to the side and both eyes looking upward. Gulliver decides to visit the Grand Academy of Legato, and he notices that the research there is ridiculously insane, impractical, and out of touch with reality. Some of the things they try to do is extract sunbeams from cucumbers, soften marble for pillow use, have blind people mix paint by smell, and uncover political conspiracies by looking at people's excrement. Afterwards, he ends up sailing to Japan, and then back to England. The importance of this part is to relate to all of the nonsense that humans devote lots of resources to. After 5 months, Gulliver leaves his pregnant wife to go on another adventure. He is a captain of a ship, but after a mutiny of his crew, he is held in the cabin of the ship. He is held there until the ship gets to a strange land, filled with rational-thinking horses, called houyhnhnms, and brutish human-like creatures, called yahoos. Gulliver's first encounter with a yahoo ended when it tried to poop on him. It was as if humans and horses had switched roles and behaviors. At first he is welcomed by the houyhnhnms, but then they notice that he is very similar to the yahoos, so they banish him. He builds a boat and paddles out to sea in search of an island to spend the rest of his days, but after a lot of paddling, he is rescued by a Portuguese ship, and that's when Gulliver notices that he can't help but see all humans as yahoos. This part represents how brute humans are, and how closely related they are to any other animal. The beginning of the Augustan Movement is recognized. Many argue as to when it truly started, but the most common answer you will find is the turn of the 17th century. Later writers, such as Oliver Goldsmith and Voltaire, named the movement of satire in prose Augustan. Many even fought over what the age should be called. Some examples were the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Exuberance, and the Age of Scandal.
In 1708, Swift composed another piece of work. He authored the story Baucis and Philemon, which may sound slightly familiar to you. In this story, 2 elders who sheltered 2 wandering men, unknown to them that they were gods, were granted a wish. Upon completing their requests of being guardians of the city, they were turned into 2 trees.
Citizens went crazy for a new alcoholic beverage they called gin. One woman in particular went so far as to drown her child just to sell the clothes to buy more gin. The protests and riots that came as a result of this gin also influenced many writers to document the chaos of the time.
The Iliad and Odyssey were both translated by Alexander Pope over a matter of years. He was hands down the single poet who influenced the Augustan age the most. It is one thing that Pope was able to translate the poems in the first place, but his success came from the perfection of his work. It was described as a performance which no age or nation could hope to equal. After great success, Pope went on to translate much of Shakespeare's work. In addition to translations, Pope was a successful poet. His use of the heroic couplet, a new type of poetry at the time, earned him great fame. Heroic couplet is one of the most common types of poems known to us. Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so are you is probably the most recognizable example of heroic couplet. Simply rhyming the final syllable of the final word in each phrase allowed for epic narrative poetry.
Robinson Crusoe was published in 1719. It is fascinating how a novel published long ago is still so popular today. This book was revolutionary in that the narrator was Robinson Crusoe himself. First-person narrative is something that seems so simple and common today, but in the year 1719, it was something unheard of. The idea caught on very quickly, and soon everyone was using this form of narrative. An act of censorship for the British stage was the Licensing Act of 1737. This act allowed for the Lord Chamberlain, a high official in the government, to approve or deny any theatre play before it was staged. This was problematic for aspiring playwrights, because often new plays were denied access to the stage, forcing many to perform stage revivals. Although a large population opposed this act, it turned many authors' focus from the stage to writing novels, thus increasing their popularity. In the 18th century, enlightenment was occurring in all of the intellectual fields. That being said, the English language was becoming rapidly complicated. Samuel Johnson was hired, and 9 years later, with the help of 6 assistants, the first English dictionary was completed. Each of the 40,000 words was partnered with a definition, a description of their use, and a literary quote providing an example of the word used in a sentence. It was labeled as the first dictionary that could be read with pleasure, because I myself really enjoy sitting down and reading a dictionary. Welcome back to the Old English News. Jolly bad news about the death of Jonathan Swift. He was such a talented writer. A Tale of the Tub was by far my favorite novel of his. Speaking of Swift, his good chap Alexander Pope sat down with us for an interview last spring. Do you remember this? So Pope, what challenges did you face while translating the Iliad and the Odyssey?
Well, first of all, it took quite a long time. Many, many years, in fact. Indeed, it took so long that I had to hire some help. Darn near killed my reputation, but I still took all the credit and the profit.
What was the biggest challenge you encountered as a wealthy man you are?
Definitely dealing with all the poor people. They're filthy, you know.
Oh yes, you have my sympathy. Quite wretched things they are. Just the other day, I ran one over with my horse. Didn't even look back.
Quite a lucky man you are, indeed.
Yes, well thank you, Alex, for joining me today. It was an honor.
Thank you, my good man.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that man. So sad he had to pass away so recently as well. It seems as if all the important people are dying as of late, almost as if this might be the start of a new era. Nevertheless, we'll bring back right after this commercial break. Only on the Old English News Station.
Today marks the end of an era. Jonathan Swift is dead. He is now in a better place along with his friend Alexander Pope. Rest in peace, Jonathan. You are a great man.